The seafood on your plate, faster customs procedures for your overseas package, cheaper IT goods in many markets. What do these things have in common? They have all been made possible by decisions made at a WTO ministerial conference. Ministerials, as we call them, are the highest authority of the World Trade Organization.
India was the fastest growing economy in the G20 for 4 straight years. Now the World Trade Organization has just handed New Delhi its report card, and the message is blunt. Grow faster, trade more openly, stop leaning on tariffs to do the work reform should be doing. This week, WTO members sat down in Geneva to review India's trade policy for the first time in years. Here's what's actually in that report and what it signals about where India's economic model goes next. Hi, this is Indranil and welcome to the Spotlight Beyond Profession, where we go beyond the headlines into the policy room. Let's start with what's actually happening and when. The WTO Secretariat has released its report ahead of India's 8th Trade Policy Review scheduled for July 21st and July 23rd. Every WTO member undergoes this review periodically. It's a structured assessment of a country's trade policy conducted jointly from a Secretariat report and a report submitted by the country itself. This round covers India's trade performance from 2021 through the end of 2025. The Secretariat's core finding: India's policy framework continues to rely on relatively high tariffs, import and export controls, state trading enterprises, and extensive budgetary support programs. In plain terms, India is still leaning heavily on trade restrictive and state-directed tools rather than structural competitiveness. The WTO's recommendation is direct. It has urged India to focus on reforms that improve the business environment, strengthen competitiveness, and attract more foreign investment, and to reduce reliance on trade restrictive measures in favor of more efficient resource allocation. Now, the ambition India has set for itself. New Delhi is targeting a rise in its share of global merchandise exports to around 10% by 2047, which is up from just 1.8% in 2024. That's not an incremental goal. It's a 5.5-fold increase in global export share over roughly 2 decades. On growth, the numbers support confidence. India's real GDP growth is forecast to range between 6.8% and 7.2% in financial year 2028, continuing a run in which India was the fastest growing G20 economy through the review period. But the WTO's caution is explicit. Sustaining that performance will require addressing structural challenges, high trade cost, regulatory complexity, infrastructure gaps, and barriers to deeper global integration. India's own submission tells a complementary story. New Delhi points to external headwinds, geopolitical tensions, pandemic aftershocks, climate-related disruptions, and export controls imposed by other countries as having adversely affected the availability and cost of critical inputs. It also flags a specific concern: excess capacity and overproduction in certain sectors globally, which India says are distorting trade and prices in international markets. And critically, India says it's facing rising non-tariff measures from trading partners, complex standards, conformity assessment procedures, and regulatory requirements, which it says are constraining market access for Indian industry abroad. On the multilateral system itself, India's position is one of continued commitment. It says its trade policy will remain aligned with WTO rules even as it pursues deeper reform and global integration. Here's where we apply the governance and ESG lens, because trade policy is, at its core, a governance story about how a nation allocates resources and manages openness. 1. The self-reliance versus openness tension. The WTO's report captures this precisely. India's future growth and resilience will be determined by the balance between self-reliance and openness, and its engagement with multilateral trade reform. This isn't a new debate for India. It echoes decades of policy tension between protecting domestic industry and integrating into global value chains. What's different now is the scale of ambition attached to it. A 10% global export share by 2047 is incompatible with a trade regime that remains, in the WTO's words, reliant on high tariffs and state trading enterprises. 2. Regulatory complexity is a competitiveness issue. The WTO explicitly names regulatory complexity and infrastructure gaps as structural barriers. From an ESG governance standpoint, this matters beyond trade economic. Regulatory unpredictability is one of the top factors foreign investors cite when assessing country-level governance risk. Reform here isn't just about tariffs, it's about the ease, consistency, and transparency of the rules foreign capital has to navigate. 3. The legitimate grievance, not just defensiveness. India's compliant about rising non-tariff measures, complex standards, conformity assessment procedures, regulatory requirements from trading partners deserves to be taken seriously, not dismissed as an excuse. Non-tariff barriers have become a primary tool many advanced economies use to restrict market access without violating headline WTO tariff commitments. This is a genuine two-way accountability question. India is being asked to open up while facing a global trading environment where a non-tariff protectionism is rising almost everywhere. 4. Overcapacity and price distortion. India's reference to excess capacity and overproduction in certain sectors leading to trade distortions is a pointed, if unnamed, reference to a live global debate. The flow of a below-cost, state-supported production into international markets. This is a governance issue at the global level. When domestic industry policy is one economy distort prices worldwide, it directly undermines the efficient resource allocation. The WTO is simultaneously asking India to pursue domestically. The report holds two truths at once. India needs to reform, and the global trading system it's being asked to integrate into isn't fully playing by its own rules either. 5. The credibility test of the 2047 target. A goal of 10% global export share by 2047 will be judged not on ambition but on execution. The WTO review essentially draws the roadmap: reduce trade restrictive measures, cut trade costs, simply regulations, close infrastructure gaps. Whether India narrows the gap between stated ambition and structural reform will be the single clearest signal of policy credibility for global investors over the next 2 decades. Zoom out, and this review lands at a pivotal moment for the global trading system itself. Multilateralism is under real strain. Geopolitical fragmentation, rising non-tariff protectionism, and industrial overcapacity are reshaping how countries trade, even as the WTO's rulebook remains largely unchanged since its founding. India's position committed to WTO rules while pursuing an assertive reform and self-reliance agenda mirrors a challenge facing most major emerging economies right now: how to integrate deeper into global trade without full exposure to a system whose rules aren't being applied evenly. For global investors and policymakers, India's trade policy review isn't just about India. It's a live case study in whether the world's largest emerging economy can convert growth into genuinely open, competitive, rule-based integration, or whether self-reliance and restriction continue to shape the model instead. If you found this breakdown useful, subscribe to the Spotlight Beyond Profession, where we decode the policy and governance stories shaping the global economy. Follow us across YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn at the Spotlight Beyond Profession, and subscribe to the Spotlight Intelligence Letter on Substack for deeper policy and capital markets analysis. Thank you very much for watching, and signing it off.